Hello, everyone. Welcome to Psychology and Spirituality, a bridge for a better life. We, as always, are very happy to receive all your comments and sometimes some questions and all the possibilities we have to address subjects like in psychology and spirituality. They are so pivotal in our lives. Today, as always, because I will always be saying that, we have a very important topic to talk about. But before we get there, let me first greet our guest speaker today. That is Marcia Trajano. Hi, Marcia. How are you doing today?
I'm so good. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this today with me, Jussara.
Yes, we have been together in this journey for over 3 years. And it's been, at least for us, we hope that for you as well, that have been accompanying us, that have been listening to our podcast, that it has been a journey as well, a journey for the betterment, a journey to self-discovery, and to inspire each and every one to face oneself, and above all to work on the things that we have to work to have a better life, which is all the purpose we have here, right? And we are inspired by mainly by the works of the benefactor Joanna de Angelis, that has been giving us so many books, so many messages through the medium Divaldo Pereira Franco, and from himself as well, as also analyze the important aspects that we have in terms of science from psychology, psychiatrists. For instance, we look a lot about the teachings of Jung and Freud and Viktor Frankl, amongst others. But one of the topics that have been very hard for us to always discuss and to think about is when we have to deal with our grief. And this grief that can manifest in different ways, that can be the result of the loss of a loved one to death, or the loss of other things that we consider to be important and vital in our lives. And today we are going to be focusing more on the aspect of death, of really being capable of re-signifying the absence of someone that is so loved uh, that we love so much. And one of the things that sometimes we think and we have to question ourselves is whether, how do we see or experience death per se? We see this as the wall or as an horizon? Is this, the beginning of a new phase, or is just, the wall, the end of everything, the absolute cold final? And we have all these questions on how, what this absence really means. And I would like, Marcia, for you to, to talk to us about that, this resignification, this wall or horizon, and this aspect that we all face in life sooner or later, whether you have not gone already through the loss of a loved one. It's inevitable for all of us. So it's about that would like to be talking today.
Yes, and I wanted to say, because we have had several episodes on the larger theme of grief, right, Josara? But I think it's important for us to perhaps to recognize that our world, right, our world that we live in, um, on a daily basis, loss is no longer this, oh, one point in time or 2 points in time that you have life interrupted. It's no longer that once in a lifetime. It has become perhaps this constant undercurrent. So we grieve and we grieve, and we talked about it. We grieve about many different type of disruptions, including the death of loved ones. So before we talked about the topic at hand, which is the resignification, right? Resignifying death specifically, the absence that comes as a result of a death of a loved one. We see that in the process of grieving, we are also grieving about the loss of, say, our certainty, right? That maybe immature way as children, that we saw the horizon, as you mentioned, which is a beautiful metaphor, by the way. But the horizon was quite large, right? It's almost like you're in the flat surface instead of in seeing the curve. But we lose and grieve for this, the loss of identity, of a sense of belonging, or the future. So we talked all about it in the past, but it's important for us to really um, today talk about that grief really begins with absence. It doesn't end there, but it begins with absence. So let's maybe start with defining, right, what it is and what it's not. The idea of resignification of absence, and I would say just out of that, it's probably the most difficult thing for us to understand, right? Because it is a demanding pressure. It is an imperative, if you will, and it leads to this transformative aspect of ourselves, which comes through grieving. But this imperative requires us to do something that is quite ambiguous and even paradoxical. It is accepting that someone or something is no longer present, at least in form, and pushing ourselves to discover that its meaning that it held in our lives is not just preserving the form, but go into the essence, or being, I don't know how to say this, but giving us the muscle capability, if you will, the ability to go deeper into that relationship. So, Josada, if I may, and I want to reference my own experience, right? I have been through grief many times, but in my most recent one, and I could say probably the most difficult experience of grief has been at first. Something that felt like something was taken away, right? The absence, the term that we're talking about here today, absence was so present, which is a bizarre way to talk about it. It felt like something took away something from me, someone from me, that I was robbed of something that was quite important, very dear as well to me. And over time, and I can say maybe this is a little bit about the transformation that we're talking today. I start to see the pain that ever present absence start to reconfigure, and I start to see that what has changed, it is perhaps my own definition, my own definition and identity and sense of self. So maybe, Josiah, we can talk about, that from a definition perspective, resignifying absence really is not about what comes so almost as a cliche. Come on, we got to move on, or come on, you got to let go, stop complaining. and instead resignifying and embarking into this path of allowing ourselves to resignify our own pain for the loss of a loved one is moving away or moving from perhaps that presence that was very external, very form, right? Somebody that you can talk to, and there is very tangible aspects of that relationship in and moving into that very internal and silent, if you will, relationship. So instead of the sensorial connection, it becomes more of a symbolic one. And again, I would say form into not function per se, but essence, right? So my first days after I went through rather recently the death of my father, and my early stages of grief, my mind just sort of kept saying quite loudly, "He is gone. He is gone," and it was so difficult. And several months later, I can see, and maybe it's the maturity, or as referencing Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the curve of grief. I could say, well, he's no longer here in the same way that he was before, right? And in what he in the relationship of me and my father, I can see that he has, through absence, which is very interesting here, through his absence, he has awakened in me something that remains very much alive, which is, on one hand, this deep sense of gratitude for the legacy that he left behind, as well as the sense, and this I see for those of us who are grieving, this is not for anyone. We all have the time to grieve. It's a very personal journey, but maybe you're going through the same, right? That there's a shift, right? A shift from an emotional perspective, that I could go to a new state that does never really erase my sense of longing for my father, but it is this new form of connecting to that person who's no longer here in the material sense, but still the connection is there. So I just maybe this is something that we could start in our conversation, Jussara.
Yeah, I like very much that you say it's a very personal experience, because whatever we are saying here, we can only talk about what we really experience, how we feel.
Mhm.
And I think it's very important for us to understand that each person is going to feel different, even
Yeah,
because each relationship is different. And the stage, the emotional stage that we are in is different. So I think, for starters, we should never criticize or think this person is crying too much or
yeah,
crying too little. It doesn't show that it's grieving, because everyone does grief in a different way, and it doesn't mean because you shed more tears it is more hurtful to you than it is for others. And
yeah,
sometimes it's like all those stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about so well.
yeah,
When we go to the first stage, that is denial. When you go through
yeah,
denial, it can be very hard for us to manifest what we are actually thinking. And there is all this reason that comes with it. Sometimes when a death is unexpected, people will immediately think that you are entitled to be more surprised or more shocked.
yeah,
But when it's a long illness, or it's an old age, sometimes people will say, were you not prepared for that? Will not necessarily validate
yeah,
ours. But in this case here, what we wanted to talk about is about how we feel and how it's so hard. And one of the things that you said, you mentioned, the letting go.
Yeah.
I was wondering if perhaps one of the reasons that it's so hard for us to let go is because it will feel like a betrayal. Like,
Yes.
I'm reorganizing myself. I'm, and going through a new stage. Like, life goes on. Just go, just move on. And
Yeah.
what do you feel about this?
Yeah.
Feeling of betrayal, for instance.
Yeah. And I think we could even talk about, in addition to betrayal, other very and it's legitimate because that's what you're feeling, right? But it's a question of, for example, um, resentment or guilt, even, right? It's the sense of, why did you leave me? And I say this, for example, Jussara, and I'm thinking just now of a beautiful, very close couple, and he was one of the most um, just he provided so much to his wife, right? Young family, and he did it all. He took care of every aspect of their lives, and he also used to skydive, and it took one daring new jump that he did, and it was a fatal accident. He died on the spot, and this is maybe almost 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And I remember how his wife, who had this beautiful, beautiful relationship, she had it all, right? And she was just like, she could not deal with that, and she felt, like you said, a betrayal. How could he? How could he leave her? No, he didn't. So there was a lot of that ambiguity over not having closure into that. And I don't know if I could talk a little bit about it. We discussed before in previous conversations, you and I, right? We talked about this sense of ambiguity, um, when, for example, you cannot really uh, pinpoint that it's really happening. And if you don't mind, again, I'd love to bring the idea that from an ambiguous loss, or any loss without closure or even clarity. In the case of an accident, there was no closure. He just went out with a new parachute, and poof, he died. In this case of this couple that I met and that I knew. But in there's some other cases that are very, very difficult. And I am going through this with my in-laws, Josara. My father-in-law has a senile dementia, right? My mother-in-law is just started later than he in with Alzheimer. So different aspects of the same experience, which is the loss of memory. And what happens there is he's physically present, right? My father-in-law, he's physically there. They're both in a memory care facility. They're taking care with really great staff and everything that you could ever ask for. They've been together for 65 years. They're one of those super amazing partners. But while they live in the same room, in the same facility, being going through that stage of their lives together, he's no longer there, right? And it's just very difficult for her because the ambiguity is there. And I know there are many other examples where perhaps even I would say we see that more in movies than things that I have had experience. But let's say a family where someone is missing, or even a relationship that was so strong and you've been canceled or ghosted, and all of a sudden there's something missing. So it's very similar. Many different other examples of that sense of ambiguity. And what I was talking earlier to you several weeks ago was the idea of the metaphor of the Schrodinger's cat, right? So for those of you, it's really well accepted metaphor, and it's used for quantum physics. But the experiment just said it's all about a cat that is in a box, and the box is sealed, so you know there's something there. But is the cat dead or alive? Right. So I love that type of metaphor because it really exemplifies the stage of grief that is ambiguous when we don't have a clear sense of closure. And the mind, and I'm projecting here to my mother-in-law, right, is my husband gone, but he's still here. He's physically here, but he's emotionally not here. And our, and not just her, but the entire family, including myself, we feel a sense of suspension between, do we accept and can I grieve, or do I hope? And we cannot resolve the loss itself, right? He's alive, but he's no longer the man that I know, that I loved him to death. He's still there, but is he? So the question is he still part of my life or not? And with that, it comes those ambiguous feelings like you're talking about. How uh, can I deal with the fact that he is going through that, but I'm still angry, right? I resent, I regret as well the things, the unspoken truths about this relationship. There's so much that is still in that state of ambiguity that is so hard for so many. So it's not just the death as we're talking here, but absence can be also felt in those instances as well. As well, what do you think from
It's
that
very
perspective?
important that you brought this, situation that is happening
Hmm.
to you right now,
Yeah,
in the sense that we basically said that when we start the podcast that we were talking mostly about death, but the thing
yeah,
is the resignificance of absence in this case, like you say, it's physically there,
yeah,
but it's not there.
yeah,
So it's of course a way that or something that we will experience grief as well. And
yeah,
I think that there is another kind of ambiguity that we have to face, the contradiction, because since we are talking here about psychology and spirituality, we start from the understanding that life
mhm,
goes on, really,
yes, yeah,
meaning there is no death, there is the continuation. Like I'm not contemplating a wall, I'm
yeah,
contemplating the horizon. It's not
yes,
because I'm not seeing that there is nothing happening there. And when we go through this, when we have this understanding, this more spiritual understanding of immortality, we there is a conflict that we may go through, because if I believe in the continuity of life, why do I still grieve?
yes,
Right. And we know that the body will feel the absence. It's only
yeah,
normal, but the heart will miss the presence uh,
yeah,
as well of the person. So this ambiguity of am I allowed to have this kind of belief and still grieve? And
yeah,
at the same time, if I'm thinking like that,
yeah,
why do we have this resistance to let go, even in simple things? Let's talk about the closed room. We
yeah,
have that untouched
mhm,
room, sometimes closed, the object
yes,
untouched. We will leave it there as if at any moment the person was going to return in the form
yes,
that they had. And so it's and it goes with all those things like what happens if I let go, what if
Yeah.
happens if I understand, and how do I personally
Yeah.
feel if am I going to be affected by the judgment of the world by saying you're too cold, or you're deranged in feeling
Yeah.
that life goes on, in the sense of the person is going to continue to exist beyond the veil that
Yeah.
we cannot see. So what are your thoughts about that, Marcia?
Yeah, no, no, and this is so important and rather difficult, right? Not so difficult intellectually, but difficult to internalize. So on one hand, let's pretend the idea, and somebody mentioned that to me, by the way, Jussara, that this is somebody who no longer lives in his home country, and his in this case was his mother passed, and the siblings decided along with him to keep their home, right, her home, and they kept what this person called, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, right, the mausoleum for that person, that empty room, like you said, and somehow we are triggered to believe that if we honor the person in the space, we are actually demonstrating our love for the person. And there's so many ways for us to think about it. From a spiritist perspective, it's much easier for us to understand the idea of again, this is the essence versus form. And I think it was Aristotle that maybe brought some things that can talk about it. And if you don't mind, I can talk about it just a bit, because it is really interesting. How do we move away from the tangible to the idea, but what is real, right? So maybe we can think about that series, the Matrix, where is the reality one or the other? What is that, the essence versus the form? And Aristotle described, um, and as we know, not just a Greek philosopher who greatly influenced Western society in many, many different ways. But he brought this idea that there are accidents, and I don't know if you read this, Josiah, but there are accidents and there is the essence. Okay. So he calls accidents as those things that are characterized by changeable attributes. What are we talking about? Well, my body as a child changed until my last day on earth, right? My voice would change, my habits even would change. So he talks about the accidents and the essence. And the essence, according to Aristotle, was the core of makes something fundamentally what it is. So, similar to what we are talking before, when we are grieving someone who died, we are, and this is my interpretation, Josiah, we are moved to internalize that the accidents, using Aristotle's words, right? The accidents are gone. So his or her physical presence, the voice, the perfume. For example, my mom, who passed many years ago, the one thing that always comes to me was her perfume, her what she smelled like. Isn't it interesting, right? But it's an accident. It's not who she was or who she is. And but the essence, according to Aristotle, is what stays, the values, the love, the influence. So when we put that in within the core of spiritism, we understand as the accidents can be maybe the this incarnation, right? This physical manifestation of a spirit that will live beyond this current physical life. The essence doesn't go away, it continues. And for us who are still here and may not believe in reincarnation, for example, I'm bound perhaps more for those changeable attributes than to the core. And here we are really, I mentioned the word, the imperative, right? We have this new imperative that it's not to say goodbye, but it's to say goodbye to those accidents. So when my grandma, I love my grandmother, she was just an amazing person, but as she was so close to me, she passed many, many decades ago, and her physical presence was gone, not just to me, but to all of my um, cousins. And so long years, so much time has passed, and Josiah, her absolutely, her presence is still felt within me, right? And when I talk about it, is her kindness is it's so vivid in all of my memories, and I can see that the mandate now is not just to miss, to long for her, she's moved on, but is to live through the kindness in this case on how she treated others and incorporate that legacy as well. So it's almost like those leave us this ethical imprint. I don't know if that's the best term for me to use, but this imprint of who I am, my DNA, if you will, my values will be transformed because I had a chance to live with that person. So for me, and I'm talking here about the resignification of the absence, is the ability to identify those values and carry with me that essence within that relationship. Does this make sense to you?
I mean, you stirred a lot of thinking. um, because I mean, it's been very rich because when you also mentioned about the mausoleum, okay,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we are talking about a spiritual perspective of understanding life, and like you said, whether you believe or not in reincarnation, according to statistics, 89%, almost 90% of the
yeah,
world population do believe in immortality. We
yeah,
pray for our loved ones who somehow we think that they continue. We go to mass, we light
yeah,
candles to them. There are so many manifestations that we can have. So starting from this point that we do believe in, in this spiritual aspect of the being and immortality, the question here is, I'm sorry, but I think this is going to be something that it's giving, it will really,
mm,
lead us to think, to reason about it. I mean, why am I doing this mausoleum?
yeah,
Is it because sometimes, I really think the person is going to be connected there, or because, I will be okay with myself thinking, well, I did something. I,
yeah,
I no longer have any responsibility. Look, this is your place. This is here. Look what I did for you. And
yeah,
how, if it were us there, would I prefer to have a mausoleum, or would I prefer to live in the thoughts of that person, in the hearts of that person? To every now and then, like you said, now I feel the essence of what I
yeah,
learned from my grandmother in some
yeah,
of the things that I accomplished. So, what would be in this situation? And this is the question.
yeah,
The most authentic way for us to show love to someone that have crossed the
Yeah.
veil, have passed. Is it by themes? Is it by honoring, the objects they had, the way of living, or is it by honoring them through ourselves, through our thoughts, through our
Yeah.
hearts that are going to manifest in a different way? So there is no way we can think that we do not have responsibility. Like, sometimes, people go to their church and temple once a week and say, okay, now this week I went there once. I'm okay with
I'm
God.
good.
I'm good. I'm good. Do we think this way, or and so how do we see? And this is about what we were talking about here, right, Marcia? According to how our understanding and how we are going to be grieving and going
Yeah.
through this process
Yeah.
is this resignification, really,
Yes.
of our positioning
Yeah.
before all that. And so,
Yeah.
in this sense, how can I manifest love?
Correct. Right. And I'm gonna say, to me, and it is really through the Spiritist teachings and perspective, because we know that, right? We know that the connection continues, and continues how? Every time I have a memory of that person, or how I am aligned to the values of that person, or even my vibrations of love, I connect, right? So it's really, really easy, but it's not easy to do. It's easy to understand, and I mentioned before, right? Intellectually, it's easy, Jussara, but it's not so easy, because when we are going through so much of the difficulty of the loss, especially if it's an abrupt loss, we just we want to cry out loud, like you said. I'm angry. I'm resentful. I'm going through regrets as well. There's so much, this soup of information, of things that we're going through, that is hard for us to move. And I think, in addition to understanding that we are connected to all of those who have left before us, right? And every single time we think of them, they feel our vibrations. But the truth is, Jusada, is that I think grieving and resignifying the absence, the void, right, that remains, is about perhaps doing this U-turn, if you will, right? So, as we experience grief, which is really important, in my opinion, to go through it. Don't deny it. Just go through all of that we are emoting, that we're feeling, but we are confronted with the idea that we must be shifting, instead of losing the other. And what I'm thinking here, Josiah, is I'm losing an external relationship, right? There is the other. I'm here, and the other is outside of me. I'm losing that. But that grieving process brings the other into inside of me, which pushes us to really this new paradigm, which is through grief, through loss, I find myself, right? So I know you mentioned regret, guilt. There's so many questions of unspoken truths, or words, or unfinished love. But if we start to look about the U-turn, we start to understand that it is a very beautiful aspect of our lives. And guess what? 100% of people will go through grief, right, Jusada? That is something that we cannot say, oh, this is just this gender, or this race, or this nationality. 100% of us, humanity, will go through the loss of a loved one. no matter what. So let us be prepared to understand not only the emotional upheaval that we go through, but also preparing ourselves to do this U-turn. I was thinking just now, and I don't know if if we have much time, but I was thinking. Because Freud and we often discuss about Jung and Freud, etc. But Freud, he brought the idea of grieving, mourning versus melancholy, right? So being depressed or melancholic, sad is one aspect of emotional response to the absence. But Freud had said from a mourning specifically is the process of seeing ourselves gradually withdrawing our emotional energy from the lost whatever, right? But this is Freud reinvesting that energy into life. So it's a pivot in how we go through. It's learning, it's honoring, but it's an investment into other aspects of our lives. Where melancholia, as he mentioned, is the loss is internalized and it becomes what you were talking earlier, in a self, the source of self-criticism, source of guilt, or even in some cases, according to Freud, identity collapse. I lost my young husband. Now I don't know who I am. And I can get into a pathological state of depression that it really will need help, right, of someone. But if we think of ourselves, perhaps, that if we are stuck in our grief, we can see that we can change that, right? We can start even paying attention in our language, and instead of saying I'm nothing, I cannot function without so and so, to I miss so and so, and I'm grateful for so and so having that impact in my lives. So, or even it's my fault. It's a different type of response, right? It's my fault that someone went on this trip and had an accident and died, or because I have certain regrets for not being a better person, not taking care, better care of, say, my parents, etc., etc. I don't deserve to move forward. Those are traps that are easily for us to fall prey to this, to fall vulnerable to those traps. So I think it's this. We need to look at grief from a. I hate to say this, but it is. It's a positive aspect of life, because instead of looking at this attack on us, it's this invitation to move on, right? To re-signify and to understand, again, using the metaphor they use with the horizon, right? When, if you're in a, let's say, in a ship, and you see the horizon and there's nothing there, just more sea, and as we keep going, there's more horizon and we never get there, but at some point that horizon changes to land, right? To a landmass, and you can start to see there's some changes there. There's a new life, there's a new opportunity, and we just need to learn to live with those, the ambiguity of what is presence, what is absence, and what is absence in presence, or presence in absence.
Okay. Yeah, one thing that I would like to emphasize to our listeners is that,
Yeah,
all our discussions here about grief, like we said before, it's just
yeah,
something very personal. There is no right or wrong. And we commonly hear people saying, when they go through pain, knowing that someone else are going through this loss to the death of loved one,
yeah.
going to someone that has already endured that, going through that, and you ask, when does the pain stop?
Oh,
And I mean, there's no time. I mean,
yeah.
and there is no specific time. And sometimes what we see as a response is that it never goes away. You
Yeah.
just learn to live with that. And I think this is all about this resignification.
Yes.
When it comes to a point that the grief
Mm.
for the loved one changes something in us,
Yes.
invites us, like you were saying, Marcia, to reevaluate where we are placing our priorities in life,
Yes. Yes.
because there is no better way for us to question this and to revisit our values than when we go through some trauma, through some loss of any kind, and of course through a traumatic
Yeah.
experience of losing a loved one, parents, children, all the loved ones. And it's when we have to think about how blessed we are for our health, and
Yeah.
how we should not refrain ourselves from kindness,
Yeah.
because we take it for granted, words that would make the world so much better,
Hmm.
like, I love you, like, I appreciate what you do,
Yeah.
I'm seeing you. And we just don't know, the person knows that, and all of a sudden you don't have more time
Yes.
to express that. There is one author that I like very much, is Leo Buscaglia, that he used to be a teacher at UCLA, and he
Yeah.
wrote a book. He wrote many books, but one of them about love. And he talks about, a husband that lost his wife, but his wife before passed, I don't remember whether it was sudden or an illness, but she was longing for a beautiful red dress that she saw
Yeah.
at the mall, and he was saying no, 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 no. And then all of a sudden, when she died, he goes and buy the dress, and she is buried in the dress. And the question Leo Buscaglia asked us is, why are you going to do that before,
Yeah.
the after the person is gone?
Yeah.
Why do we refrain so much? Why do we are we so afraid of expressing our emotions? Sometimes we even feel shame of
Yeah.
telling someone, I like you, I love you. And
Yeah.
in this case here is, we are inviting all of you in terms of this resignification and thinking about, this spiritual values, immortality, and all of that. First of all, it's never too late for us to tell this person that we love them, whether they
Yeah.
have passed or not.
Yeah.
But let's take advantage while they are in the way with us. And like Marcia said, it's inevitable. We
Yeah.
all are going to go through that, to experience that.
Yeah.
And this should be an occasion for us to rise, and not for us to bury ourselves with the person as well, which I'm sure none of them would like us to do that.
Yeah.
So honoring those that have passed means I'm your legacy somehow.
Yes. Yes.
And as your legacy, I have the obligation of, continuing in your footsteps, or setting a pattern in the world that will be uh, actually the continuation of what you have done. So your grandmother, her kindness, the sweetness that you said, now you express, and you learn, and you pay forward, you move forward with that. And so this is it. The pain may be there, and sometimes they are more aggravated, we know, in certain occasions, for sure. uh,
Yeah.
Birthdays, etc., is when holidays, when we are going to feel more. But and allow yourself to do that, but at the same time, in the process, allow yourself to grow, and to
Mhm.
have the certainty that life goes on. So, Marcia, we are coming
Time goes by so fast. Yes.
to hear
Yeah.
your final words and
Yeah.
the appreciation for our partners in this podcast.
Absolutely. One of the things that came to my mind as we're coming to a closure is, in addition to that legacy, I think there is the flip side about it, Jussara, because grief should also push us to be more authentic. And what do I mean by that? Let's say I'm in my 20s, anyone, 30s, so very young, and I lose a friend. And I have potentially the choice to, through my grief, to postpone any meaningful relationship because I'm afraid that I'm going to suffer again, right? That I'm going to go through the same pain that I went through with that person. Or, and I think this is what's important for all of us to consider, is we could begin choosing to live, engage in relationships more intentionally, right? So, from that aspect, the absence of the one friend that we lost may become the springboard for us to really be our teacher, to be present, to be intentional, to be mindful at every moment. So I think resignification also means living, and I'm saying this for what you said and what I'm saying now, but living in a way that honors all of those that were in touch with us, but also honors impermanence, right? As it revealed when we go through loss. I hope this makes sense. Um, but thank you. Thank you, Jussara, for having me here. I really appreciate it. I didn't think I was going to be able to do it just because it's still recent that I lost my dad, but I did not lose him. We just resignified our relationship. So, with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you, Jussara, and thank you to all of our viewers, right? If this is something that perhaps was beneficial and you know somebody who's going through grief, please forward this episode to that person, right? And um, thank you to our sponsors, Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spiritist Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AMI Brazil. I appreciate this time with all of you. Thank you so much, Jussara.
Thank you.